Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very important discussion. The conversation tonight will focus on the Muse investigation report, and we'll look at the role of France in connection with the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. This conversation is also going to focus, amongst other things, genocide denial. It's also going to look at what this report means, not only for ordinary Rwandans, but also for victims and survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, as well as what these implications are of the report on France-Rwanda relations. Joining us here, I'm very happy to welcome our guests for tonight. I'll start with Madame Florida Kabasinga. Florida Kabasinga is a managing partner at Certa Law, and also her institution, her law firm was involved in compiling this investigative report. Florida, great to have you on The Square tonight.
Thank you, Diana. It's a pleasure.
We're also joined by Dr. Jean-Paul Kimonyo. Dr. Jean-Paul Kimonyo, amongst other things, he's here in his capacity as a Rwandan author, as well as researcher. Dr. Kimonyo, great to have on the show once again. I believe this is your second time.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. My name is Diana PC, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by The Square resident panelists. On this discussion tonight, I'm happy to welcome Charles Haba. Charles, great to have you on The Square as always.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Also joining us is Brenna Namata. Brenna, great to have you on the show as always.
Thank you.
Before we do, like we always do, midweek highlights from The Square resident panelists, is there something you'd like to share with our viewers as well as our guests? Charles, I'll kick off with you.
We're talking about the French, so I think it's just befitting that we slip in something Frenchish. Alpha Blondy has a song that begins "Tout change, tout évolue, sauf les imbéciles ne changent pas." So basically, says everything changes, but it's only fools who don't change their minds. One of the biggest stories that has been happening this week is around the Big Six, and this is if you're a football fanatic or if you care about football.
Or it's shoved down your throat.
Yes,
social media for some of us.
Yes. So the top English clubs, the top Spanish clubs, the top Italian clubs come up in the morning. I wake up in the morning and decide to start up a rebel league. The idea doesn't last 48 hours. Some face the wrath of Buckingham Palace. Others face the wrath of their fans. But whatever happens, the idea lasts 48 hours. But again, as they say, it's only fools who do not change their minds.
Absolutely.
I guess we can only remember the great words of Alpha Blondy, and I think it's very, very close to the conversation we're having tonight as we may progress.
Absolutely. Brenna, are there any midweek highlights that you'd like to share?
There are reports of vaccines, COVID vaccines expiring in Africa.
In the region?
Yes. Not just the region, across Africa. And this is at a time when we don't have enough doses, but even the little we are getting, we cannot distribute it.
Painful.
I know. I mean, people like to who bewitched us.
I know, it's terrible.
Bewitched Africans, yeah.
Okay, I think I will just take a break for just a minute. There's some, I think, technical issues that we're dealing with. We'll just take a 1 minute break. Okay, so our technical issues have been solved. Well, thank you very much, Brenna. I think that's a very, it's dismal news to hear at this point in time, about the COVID vaccines. So to our guests, we are here to discuss the Muse investigation report in connection with the role of France during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So the first question, really, I would like to address it to our, from a legal perspective, the lawyer who's one of the guests tonight, is, to Florida, and of course, later on, I'd like Dr. Kimonyo to also weigh in, as well as the Square resident panelists. So, in summary, the 600-plus page report, Muse investigation report, details France's role during the genocide against the Tutsi through an examination of policies, decision, and events. These details support the report's conclusion that the French government bore significant responsibility for enabling the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, And I would like to just start with you, Florida, as someone whose law firm, Certa Law, was involved in compiling this investigative report. If you could just briefly start by telling us the genesis of this report. We know this journey started in 2017. Sorry. If you could just tell us the genesis of this report, as well as what it means for Rwandans, specifically victims and survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Over to you, Florida.
So the genocide against the Tutsi obviously happened in 1994. But since then, there have been efforts at recovering the truth. So this report is the latest in that journey of finding the truth about what happened in this country. So with regard to the French, it's been a journey with efforts in France and in Rwanda in the past, where we had the mutual report, we had the parliamentary report in France, which ended in the French declaring triumphantly that they were exonerated of any responsibility. So this country has decided that the truth must come out, at the same time as France has always tried to cover up its role and its responsibility. In 2017, this country decided to get an external law firm to dig into what exactly happened in Rwanda with regard to the French. So the result of it is that we put together a team of lawyers and investigators from both the US who had Rwandan counterparts. And I stand here speaking on behalf of the Rwandans who worked on this report. You'll be very happy to know that 70% of them were female, and most of them, actually with the exception of myself, they're very young ladies in their 20s who really are exceptional talents, and most of them were but toddlers in 1994. So being a part of this is really an honor for all of them. And the report itself, even if it's 600 pages, is a result of an investigation that spanned 3 different continents. We interviewed more than 250 witnesses. We looked at millions of pages of documents. We interviewed diplomats. We interviewed RPA, RPF officials. We interviewed ex-FAR, we interviewed survivors, we interviewed convicts, perpetrators, we interviewed journalists who are on the ground, so we looked at different documents, diplomatic cables, newspapers at the time, different UN reports, so we didn't leave any stone turned. And this report is actually so far unassailable, and it's a great work. The other thing that I want to talk about with regard to how this was conducted and the result of it for posterity is that documents were collected from all over the world, from private archives, from different places, and they're all going to be part of the National Archive. Our story will be told for posterity. And I say this not lightly because after the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, the ICTR so-called had primacy over the genocide and who they would try among the perpetrators. So what ended up happening is that they conducted investigations in Rwanda and all over the world and collected documents, most of them documents from this country, documents that belong to this country. But they are in an archive under UN auspices in Arusha, not in this country. So with this report, what has happened and this investigation is that we've collected documents from different sources. We reached out to governments that gave us documents that they have in their archives. We reached out even to France to open its archives. 3 times we wrote to them through the government of Rwanda, but they did not provide documentation. However, the thousands of documents that were collected, the millions of pages, it will be a reference that nobody can dispute. Every single finding and conclusion in this 600-page report is supported by documents. It's a fact, it's undisputed, and it's not. But this report proves all that we are saying about what happened in this country and what the French role was. I think that's all I can say at this point.
Thank you very much, Florida. Dr. Kimonyo, you've been an author of several books, charting our history, especially, with a focus on events from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi leading to today. I think a couple of your books were quoted over 60 times in this report itself. So if you could also share with us, just based on what Florida has said, if you'd like to also, weigh in on, the report, what does it mean for Rwanda, but mostly, what does it mean for survivors of the genocide?
Yeah. Maybe before to talk about survivors, I'd like maybe to highlight a bit some of the specificity or the very important advancement that this report is bringing to the knowledge of what happened during the genocide against Tutsi, but particularly regarding the role of France. This report is extremely strong, very strong finding, and like Frida said, backed by documents. But beyond that, there is also the analysis and the conclusion of the report. The report qualifies in a very precise manner the role of France during the genocide and before that. The conclusion is France has a significant responsibility in enabling a foreseeable genocide. It's very precise. Why it is important? It's important because there have been many things that have been said about France's role in Rwanda, being by, let's say, mutual report or even different report from France. But up to now, we never got a really specific and precise understanding of the role of France. And if we say that France is responsible for enabling a foreseeable genocide, I think that everybody can understand how heavy this responsibility is. So I think it is something that we should highlight. Maybe very quickly, seeing how they arrived to that conclusion. Between 1994, there's been different military events. Let's say the army of RPF was attacking the XFAR, and the XFAR, instead of only combating them, they made killings of Tutsi in particular. And at the time, human rights organization, media talked about those killings, but directly, while people were denouncing those killings, France each time reinforced its support to the Rwandan army. Being in 90, being in 91, in 90 it was Bugesera, Mutara, 91 it was Bigogwe, 92 it was Bugesera this time, and different things like that. So there was a pattern of mass killing, and at the same time being denounced by the civil society. At the same time, the French reinforcing their support to the Rwandan army. So that's why they came to that conclusion. And I think it's, the analysis show very clearly this pattern. Yeah. So regarding the survivors, this report also gives voice to survivors. There is different testimony of survivors that is in different parts of the report where survivors talk about their experience. So it's not only it talk about what France did in Rwanda, but also give a quite important voice to the survivors.
Thank you very much. And before I just hear from Charles and Brenna, just also for viewers and also for myself, I was one of the people when the Declared Commission report came out, I think last week, I actually thought this was, a response, so to speak, or something that, originated as a response to this, but actually they are totally different in the sense of the reasons as to why they exist, number one. Number two, there's also a slight difference in terms of, and like how you said, both you and Florida and Dr. Kimonyo, the Muse report is very specific in France's complicity in the genocide against the Tutsi, whereas the Declared Commission report, is slightly says that France to a certain degree was misled or blind to these atrocities that it was enabling. What is your comment on that, if you're just to compare these two reports? And I'll start with you, Florida, before we go back to Dr. Kimonyo.
First of all, I think our investigation began before the current French Commission report. I will not attempt to pronounce the gentleman's name, that I have a hard time pronouncing French names. But our investigation began before, and in fact, it was concluded a little bit before the French report came out. And of course, the wording and the findings, so-called findings in the French report left a lot to be desired. They talk about blindness, but you will realize that in our report, it's very clear that of all the Western powers, France had the most ears and eyes in Rwanda. In fact, far from being blind, they were wide-eyed more than anybody else. And I don't say this lightly. During the parliamentary investigation in France, the French ambassador at the time, in fact, admitted that as far as 1990, October 1990, they could foresee this was happening, the genocide would happen. By October 24th, 1990, you have the French military attaché, Colonel Galinier, in fact, writing back to France and telling them that there is going to be extermination of Tutsi in the numbers of between 500,000 and 700,000. So they knew. And like Dr. Kimonyo just explained, no matter what was happening on the ground, they kept up the support, they propped up a genocidal government. I'm yet to find a genocide that was not committed with the sheer force of government being involved. And quickly, if I can explain the things that were happening in tandem. In 1975, you have the French government signing a military cooperation agreement with the President Habyarimana's government. And when they did that, at the time they had a provision that they would be providing support, but that they would not get involved in preparation and execution of war efforts. However, in 1983, that was changed, and that part of the agreement was removed because the refugees in the neighboring countries were agitating, wanting to come home, and the French knew they would have to get involved at some point. So all of this was happening. The French have always known what was happening. If you see the diplomatic cables that were coming from here, they had soldiers on the ground. They had so-called cooperants, who were French soldiers that were attached to elite units of the FAR at the time. And these were like the aviation squadron, the reconnaissance battalion, and the paracommando battalion, who were very, very instrumental in committing genocide and in training the militia. So to me, the differences in the reports is that you have the French report using words like responsibility, intellectual responsibility, words like institutional responsibility, political responsibility. I am very confused at what some of those words mean, in fact. But with this report, we are very, very specific in saying what that responsibility is. And there are a number of conclusions, and it follows the history from the beginning, from the 1960s up to all the way to recently, post-genocide, the last 25 years. So it's very specific as to what they did, what that responsibility is. And all of that comes to the conclusion that they enabled a foreseeable genocide. And it was foreseeable more to France that had eyes and ears on the ground, and that they were seeing all the massacres that Dr. Kimonyo was talking about throughout that period.
Thank you very much, Florida. Dr. Kimonyo, very quickly, just your commentary between the declared commission as well as the Muse investigative.
First, there is some commonalities. The declared report also acknowledge overwhelming responsibility in what happened between 1994 here in Rwanda. It's the first time that a French institution stated that clearly, that there was a responsibility. But as Florida said, they never specified which kind of responsibility we are talking about. But already this is important because this came in the conclusion of the clerk and also come from the conclusion from Muse report. So there is a strong commonality. Differences, the clerk, they look mostly at the debate within France administration, because there's a number of French people who were against what's happening and warned their superior of what was happening. And the declare shows exactly where the order were coming from Mitterrand and his military advisors. While the Muse report is much more, is broader, and especially make the links between what is happening on the ground and those French officials.
Thank you very much. Wow, that's very informative. I know for a fact I started reading the report. I don't know, Charles and Brenna, where you've reached. It's quite a heavy load. But so yeah, thank you very much, Florida and Dr. Kimonyo. We'll be definitely coming back to more, listening to more of what you're saying and have follow-up questions. But Charles, what's your take on the report, whether it's the declared commission report, or the Muse investigation report, and also based on what our guests have said?
A number of things, but I'll only pick out two. The biggest by far that is not without doubt is the weight of overwhelming evidence around the responsibility of the French and the French government. So that's without doubt. Not dwell on that. But I think the two that are very glaring is one on the Declare Commission and its compatibility with the Muse report. First of all, it's very encouraging that the Muse report actually acknowledges the positives around the Declare Commission. But before even that happened, by virtue of the fact that President Kagame did receive the Declare Commission, it says quite a lot about the Commission. So it's a lot in a lot of steps in the right direction. So that's on a positive front. But also the other thing, and even though Florida is very cagey with her words, I think what we see is is the Declare Commission. I think it's only an issue of semantics. Daktari has alluded to it that they will shy away from using words that directly incriminate their pair. I mean, for crying out loud, the Declare Commission was commissioned report was commissioned by the French government. So you don't expect them to directly pin their government. They will say things like they fell short. So if you understand French, they will use words that insinuate that they could have done better. Whereas when you look at the Muse report, they say the French they are very deliberate. So that's why I say it's really about semantics. But they say the same thing, that the French were culpable. So that's on the other thing. But I think there's the overall picture around turning a new chapter. If you look at the Declare Commission, the Declare report and the Muse report, by the time these two reports have been done, the reason for which they have been done is not necessarily to point a picture at bringing somebody to book. Florida has alluded to this, about the importance of archiving facts. And this is going to be a conversation for scholars like Dr. Years to come and those that will come after him. That years on, we need to document facts. It doesn't matter whether we bring people to book or not. And this is almost the same thing that you see across the two commissions. I know, Diana, that's a direct question you asked around the similarity between the two. That yes, the French did this, but the politics behind the release of the two reports back to back says a lot more than the facts behind. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think politics are going to be a lot more, the politics behind French Rwanda and moving forward. I will talk about this a lot later in the show around the politics of our the maturity of our Rwandan politics. We've scored very big, very, very great highs. For crying out loud, President Macron was 16 years old by the time the genocide was happening. Does he want to bury a hatchet and blame everything on President Mitterrand? Most probably yes. Does he want to start a new slate? Most probably yes. Does he want the past forgotten and buried? Most probably not. Yes.
Thanks, Charles. We're definitely going to go into the France-Rwanda relations later on, following the release of these two fact-finding reports. Brenna?
I'd hoped you would invite the Attorney General.
I think that's a conversation for another day. Yeah.
Because
to have you on board. Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying that is because if you read the first chapters of the report, the lawyers say they've done their bit. They will not even speak to media. And so I'm not sure if
Florida is in the right place.
Yeah, so it would have been good to have the Attorney General to tell us and explain the next steps. Because clearly, and I think the other day we had the national prosecutor, she has the evidence she needs to do her work, more work. But beyond that, I think it is good that, one, we have a scientific examination of what really happened. So we can no longer say it is hearsay or this, that. There is a scientific documentation of what happened, and that is a lot of progress. I also like that the report is written in, it's not a dense document. So it's actually, as far as I'm concerned, an easy read for anybody interested. Yes, it's an easy read, even if it's 600 pages plus, it is readable. And why that is important is because sometimes when academics write documents, it's difficult, it's dense, it's a lot of technical language, but the report is written in very plain, the English copy that I've seen.
I totally agree with you.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree
and
with
that is really, really important. There are lots of references, you know, so they really did an amazing job with the documentation, and I think that's because it was very specific in terms of what it wanted to achieve, which is, this is what actually happened, and here's the evidence.
That's it.
That's
at least a major starting point.
I think that's clear. Now, I think the concern now is, what many people are wondering is, and this is why I really wished the Attorney General was here, what next? Yes, we are seeing, of course, politics is moving ahead, but we have people whose lives have not moved ahead, okay? And the report actually mentions this. The report says, for those who have not lived it, you know, they just call it genocide, yeah? But those who have lived it, this is not just a report, it means something. So how do we make it count? That is a question I really would love to put before the Attorney General. Because we can talk about the report, yes, it's well written, But then what next? And again, this is happening at a time when we're seeing a lot of distortion. A lot of distortion, a lot of denial. And so how do you make use of this report beyond just making it available? I think, first of all, Rwandan embassies abroad have their work cut out. This is not just, a document for Rwandans in Rwanda. It should be everybody's document. Because sometimes when you talk about these things, they look as national issues. This is not a national issue. Because let's not forget, France still has influence. France still sits on international bodies. It's at the UN. So, and part of the reason, I think, when I've read a few pages, I haven't finished, I'm not even in the middle of the report, but I read a few pages, and then, so they have 99, I think, conclusions and recommendations, yeah? And part of the reason they explain is that it is important to examine the failures so that we know how to improve going forward. So I hope that this will not be looked at as a national document. We have to find a way of making sure that it reaches everybody.
I think what you also mean to say, not as a national document only, but more than that. Because,
yes.
I mean, it's also just...
Yes, more than that, because...
a national document, yes.
We have just documented one of the many international community that have responsibility.
Absolutely.
And so what next? Because even as we speak, the risks are still there. So how do you address them?
Absolutely.
We still have people who struggle to call it what it is, genocide against the Tutsi. So for me, I feel that let's try to do justice with the reports. It shouldn't just be, a one-week event or one-month event. Let's make use of the report. And also, if you look at the references, it's amazing that there are some, they looked at master's thesis. I don't know, again, maybe I've not looked clearly, but the reference for the thesis is by French, I think French scholars. Apart from Dr. Jean-Paul, I'm not seeing many Rwandans, meaning that we still have a lot of room for Rwandan scholarship around the subject.
The subject, absolutely. I would like to definitely hear what our guests have to say to, our resident panelists, insights and interventions. Regarding the Attorney General, I don't know, maybe Florida can advise on this. Maybe it's too soon. I know the report came out on Monday, having the Attorney General here on a Wednesday. I feel maybe, some facts and decisions moving forward are still being gathered properly. But anyway, Florida, over to you and to Dr. Kimonyo, just to, if you have any feedback or any comments based on what Charles and Brenna have just shared with us. Florida, you can start.
Thank you. Definitely, this report is going to be dissected for years to come. And the fallout or the repercussions from it will happen maybe for a long time. But at least it is starting a conversation. It is starting a discussion around this, not just here, but in France and elsewhere in the world. One of the panelists has said that it shouldn't be a national document, and you'll be happy to know that this document is in English, French, and Kinyarwanda, and it will be available. It's available publicly. Anybody who is interested in reading it will have access to it, and possibly it does not stop anyone from using it for whatever good purpose, but for those that you've spoken about that don't want to talk about the genocide and call it what it is, the genocide against the Tutsi. I mean, I'm a lawyer, and I have to say this genocide concept is a legal construct. It has a definition. It's not an emotional thing which should be controversial in any way. The definition of genocide is that you have to have an intention to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So it does specifically talk about who the victims are. They have to be defined in those 4 categories. So when it comes to Rwanda, the victims were definitely Tutsi, and Tutsi are an ethnic group. So it has to be called what it is, not just as an emotional issue or a controversial issue, but it's a legal definition. That's what it is. So when people talk about it, I think we need to educate people, not to take it out of context. It's just simply defining who the victims are. And in that definition, that legal definition, they do not talk about perpetrators or anybody else. It's focused on the victims. And that is why it should be called what it is, the genocide against the Tutsi.
Thank you very much, Florida. Dr. Kimonyo, if you'd like to weigh in on what Charles and Bernard said, before we move into the second and last part of the conversation, just looking at, the future, what next for Rwanda-France relations? Over to you, Dr. Kimonyo.
Yes, I think what is most critical at this point in time is to have the truth out and to preserve the evidence. We were discussing with Florida, and we were saying that crime against humanity or genocide don't have an expiration date. Anytime, any party can act upon this evidence that have been presented. Now there is also a saying in political science saying that states don't have permanent enemies, they have interests. So for the time being, maybe being the Rwandan state or the French state, they don't want to prosecute individuals. That's the position of today. But this position can change, that's one thing. And second, this issue is not only between Rwanda and France. There is also Rwandans, and there is also French people. I would say that before this report that came out, I would say that about 60% of what we know about the role of France in Rwanda came through French civil society, journalists, researchers, and activists. Another thing also that we have also to keep in mind, this report doesn't prevent anybody individually as a private person to take action against anybody. Already, even before that those reports were produced, there's a number of cases of survivors pursuing the mentors in French courts. There is at least 3 cases of rape where survivors women are dragged military soldiers who rape them before courts. Those cases are in the courts. So this doesn't mean that because the different states are taking a certain course at this point in time, this doesn't prevent at all civil society do whatever they want with the truth and the evidence that has been presented.
Charles,
yes.
I'm going to kick off with you. You jumped the gun earlier on. I know you can't wait to talk about this part, but yeah, what does this mean for Rwanda-France relations? And also, I want us to touch on what also this means for genocide denial. I think, putting this report in tandem with, there's a rise in genocide denial. We've had that discussion several times on the show, so also alluding to that. But just briefly, before we listen to the rest of the panel members.
Yeah, for you to say that there were serious mistakes and for somebody else to say it was a foreseeable genocide, I think it will be my words against yours, but it will be politicized, but we'll all be saying the same thing, depending on who is paying your bill at the end of the day. And I think that's really the crux of the matter. It was a foreseeable genocide in as far as the Muse report is concerned, but there were serious mistakes made by the French in as far as the Declare report is concerned. And I mean, to me, as far as I'm concerned, that means one and the same thing. But what does this mean for French and Rwanda relations, Diana. I think there are steps in the right direction. And it is, if you look at both politics and other things that are not political, I know at the end of this show, probably Florida might break a bottle on my head, but some of these things are not legal, and Dr. has alluded to it. The politics of the world, they are no permanent friends, they are no permanent enemies. And on a lighter note, I'll tell you a story. In 2004, Reuters ran a story at a time when I think, I stand to be corrected on the timing, Rwanda had a very big problem with the French. We made a few of them pack up their bags. The French Culture Center was raised and sold off in public interest. And then Reuters ran a story, and the headline and the first paragraph was screaming, said, "The French should have known it was time to pack up their bags and leave the tiny Central African Republic the moment cricket started being played in that country."
That country. And of course, that's
Fast forward,
English influence.
Fast forward, we are saying, no, don't touch the French, even though they are culpable for killing our people, but we are up in arms against Cambridge University for hosting a talk on genocide deniers. How ironical can that be? So, to Dr.'s point, there's no love lost. It's a phase we are going through, but let's embrace that phase. It's a step in the right direction. I think if all goes according to plan, according to reliable rumors, President Macron might be visiting Rwanda in the next few days. President Kagame has visited Paris I think it was 2019. There's really no love lost, and let's be very positive about this, yes.
Although I think that comment you made about, what's happening with the Judy River talks at Cambridge vis-a-vis the French, Charles, I don't know if marrying the two is the most convenient thing. I think there's a polar opposite conversations. Or were you connecting it to the sense that we're up in arms with what's happening in the UK, but we're a bit lax with the French?
No, we never individualize some of these things. There's always a bigger picture. That's the point
I think you're also talking to the political friends.
Yes. Absolutely.
It's just about interest.
Yes,
okay, thanks for the clarification. Brenna, very quickly before we get to listen to our guests on this segment.
I think it's, if you look at what's been happening since, I think Sarkozy was president, we've seen some positive steps. It's taken long, of course, but I want to think on a scale of, it's been 6, 7 consistency out of 10, and that's encouraging. And also, I think what we see with the two reports, even if one was commissioned before the other, you have two countries that at least accept that there are issues. Yes, we are trying to move forward, but there are issues, which is like you're in a marriage, it is not working, and you say, let's just focus on the children. It doesn't mean the marriage will get better. It could get better. It may not get better, but the bigger picture is there are children in this, out of this marriage. So for me, that is how I look at the relations between
France and Rwanda.
Yes, going forward. The report is very clear. There are issues that are not under dispute. This is what the facts are. So let's try and move forward. But these are the facts. And for me, I think that's
fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah. Before we get to our guests, I just want to read a couple of tweets. There are quite many that are coming in, but I'd just like to read the few that we have time for that are coming in based on the conversation that we're having today. The first tweet that we have is from a regular tweeter, or a tweep as they say, Jolapo Aina, who states that, if we can have this on our screens, Perusing the Muse investigation report, it is glaring. It is a fact-based report of over 660 plus pages. The executive summary is laden with empirical evidence. Why do you think the 3 requests for documents archived in France were turned down? So he's questioning the role, of France in denying this information when the Muse report, team requested for it. His second tweet is also from the legal perspective, can the evidence tabled about France's complicity be a basis for legal actions against involved actors from France? And I think Berna, he's, yes, Dolapo is alluding to what you said earlier on. And then we have another tweet coming in, and this tweet is from Tony Kabatende, who says that it would be great and interesting to watch a documentary of experts, of lawyers and research digging down the archives, interviewing and conducting this research and investigations. Great topic of discussion. Florida, clearly these are people who would be interested in a sort of audiovisual element of the, how this report was put together. Last tweet for tonight comes from Karangwa Frederick, who says that credit goes to whoever played a role of hashtag the Muse report Rwanda, as Rwandans, most especially genocide against the Tutsi survivors, are enthusiastically waiting for the positive impact. I'd like to go to you, Dr. Kimonyo, and Florida. If you could just kick off by telling us, in your closing remarks, what does this report mean looking at, the future for France-Rwanda relations, and how does it also make an impact, how does it play an impact on the genocide denial of the genocide against the Tutsi? Dr. Kimonyo, I'll kick off with you.
Yes, one of the most important effects of these 2 reports is it's a very strong setback for the networks that were feeding genocide denial in France. And France was really the main source of genocide denial, and those networks now are almost in disarray. It will be difficult for them to go in newspapers or a publisher and present their thesis when the state and different actors have recognized that a number of things have been established. So I think it's a very important thing that we should also appreciate. And I'm sure that in the coming months, we're going to see these effects. That's one. Regarding the relationship between France and Rwanda, I think that those 2 reports were independent one from another, but both of them go mostly in the same direction. So I think it will help a lot in the rapprochement entre France and Rwanda.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for that little bit of French right there, Dr. Jean-Paul. Florida, what are your thoughts on the way forward, especially, connecting to a lot of what Brenna said regarding from the legal perspective, what next in terms of legal actions moving forward? I know you can't speak on behalf of the Attorney General, but just from your perspective, what next, especially with regards to Rwanda-France relations? Over to you, Florida.
Definitely, from a legal perspective, a lot can be done using both reports. There's nothing that stops civil society and individuals from filing cases against France and individuals in France within that country. And also, as Dr. Kimonyo said, for posterity, there can be more actions that can be done. But there's a time and place for those actions, and probably this might not be the moment. But there will probably come a time when more action legally can be done. With regard to France and Rwanda relations, I have to say that there are still issues that are outstanding, and it will depend possibly from the actions of France. One of those things are, have we seen the entire truth come out? Definitely not. Definitely not. There are documents that even the French Commission did not have access to. What do those documents say? In fact, the Mitterrand archive had a 50-year cap which was put on it before it's opened. And in fact, most of the documents of that time from this country have been labeled as state secret something something. So I don't think we know the truth. The other thing I want to highlight, there are so many genocide suspects that have found a safe haven in France. they're waiting to be tried. France has refused to extradite them on a frivolous legal ground. And even without extraditing them to Rwanda, that has requested them to be extradited, France has not tried the majority of them. Are they going to do it? That's a question that needs to be asked. What about all the other actions that France has been engaged in the past 25 years after the genocide? The whole Bruguière investigations that were based, in the words of their own courts of appeal, to have been based on unverifiable, unreliable evidence, most of which were from genocidaires. Is that going to happen? Are they going to continue in that direction or not? So a lot of things remain outstanding. It remains to be seen what the next steps will be between the two countries. But I think as of now, in this moment, it's, the relations are going in the right direction. Let's wait for what happens next.
Thank you very much. Well, Florida, just listening to you, and these are very interesting conversations because they, bring more questions than they do answers. But I'm just listening to your questions. Will France do this next? Will France, do this next? So I think there's actually a long way to go. These reports are the step in the right direction, but I feel they're just at the beginning point, really, of solving these issues between these two countries with regards to the genocide against the Tutsi. We've come to the end of the show. Charles, Brian?
Yeah, I only have one thing to say.
I know. That's why I always come to you.
Yeah. I only have one thing to say. I think it's the beginning, but the textbook definition of the beginning. We need to walk the talk. And I think the government of Rwanda has walked the talk. The French government is also walking the talk. In terms, will we see normalization again tomorrow? Probably not. But I want to give 2 or 3 examples in terms of...
Can you give one?
Yes. No. I'm a business person, so I'll give good examples around business. The government of Rwanda has spent a lot of money in building a a cultural center, a cultural village in Rebero that is currently run by the French. We're building... We've given a French company land to do the biggest shopping center. We've spent tens of millions of dollars in a golf course that's going to be run by the French. I think we are walking the talk in as far as that.
Will it be reciprocated? Yes. That's your question.
I think the Rwandan forgiveness story has hardly been replicated anywhere in the world. We have walked the talk by virtue of the fact that we are also not, if you look at the report, we're saying we're not going to pursue the French from a legal standpoint. Whether it is out of choice or out of the legal complexities of doing that, that's a different story. But I think I'll give a long lease of life to the Muse report on our French-Rwanda relations.
Brenna, any closing remarks from you, very quickly?
Next year, France has elections.
Yes, I believe so.
So that is also of interest. And also that will influence the way forward.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Thank you very much to our guests, Dr. Kimonyo. Thank you very much for sharing very insightful and informative conversations. Florida succinctly putting, some of what the report said forward, the role of France in connection with the genocide against the Tutsi, what remains next for France and Rwanda, we are yet to see. But like you said, this is a step in the right direction with regards to acknowledgement of the French government, at least the then government's role in the genocide against the Tutsi. I wish we had more time. I believe this is a conversation we'll definitely have once more on the show. So to you, Florida, and to Dr. Kimonyo, I would like to give massive thanks for accepting our invitation to the show.
Thank you.
To you, Charles and Brenna, thank you as always for joining the show. To our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in, sharing your ideas, your comments. Keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. To our partners, Bourbon Coffee and Uzi Collections, thank you for always supporting The Square. To our viewers, have a good night and see you again next week.